view of the terrible majesty of that God so overwhelmed
I saw that
my
God
mind.
had an absolute right to do with me as
I turned
he
about
pleased.
and fell on my knees, for I had not
I
strength
desired
to
nothing
stand.
so much as to live to his glory, to serve him with my whole heart.
An extraordinary religious enthusiasm enveloped American society from the 1790s into the 1840s. Religious leaders in America convinced Americans generally that religion was central to the development of American culture. They argued that without religion, this new independent society couldn't express itself, couldn't develop a system of morals and ethics, would have no values without religion. Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, even Episcopalians reached out to the American public, and in reaching out to the American public, they learned that revivalism, religious renewal, was among the most dynamic of all possible ways to infuse religion into the society.
Many religious groups of the period were inspired by a belief that the second coming of Christ was imminent.
The millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, would be a time of perfection, and there were a number of groups who believed that it was possible to achieve this perfectionism and prepare themselves for the millennium.
One of the principal functions of any religious commune is to separate itself from the world, to declare itself independent of the world, free of the world, free to perfect their own religious teachings.
Among the most successful millennial movements at the time was a group that became known for the ecstatic dancing that was the hallmark of its religious practice.
The Shakers actually started in England with a small Quaker group who believed that this time of the coming of Jesus was near at hand, very near at hand, and one young lady who was particularly gifted in speaking rose up to become the leader of this small group. Her name was Anne Lee. And they started their colonies in various parts of New England. Eventually they had 22 colonies. Many of these became quite large. Anne Lee came to believe that she was, in fact, the second coming of Christ in person, and her group started to accept her as that. So they started living it. They started living the millennium. Their lifestyle was complete communism. They lived together in great cleanliness, and men and the women were separated from each other. It was kind of a monastic order in a lot of ways. Their services were famous for being, shall we say, exotic. Because there was no sexual relationship between the men and the women, there was the need for some outlet for their enthusiasms and energy, and the dances apparently served those purposes.
The practice of celibacy released Shaker women from childbearing, giving them a freedom that ordinary 19th century women did not have. In the Shaker religious system, women participated as equals.
The women were treated very well. The men and women shared the work equally. I would say that among the various groups, the women were probably treated as well among the Shakers as any group that I can think of.
The Shaker population peaked in the 1830s, but their adherence to celibacy limited their growth, and their numbers steadily decreased during the remainder of the 19th century. In contrast to the Shakers, the Mormons made a mission out of reproduction and conversion. From a handful of believers in 1830, the Mormons multiplied to a membership of 10,000 in little more than a decade.
Joseph Smith's success in establishing the Mormon movement derived, first of all, from the extraordinary religious ferment in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. There was an extraordinary variety of religious opinion circulating in America that confused many people, and Smith thought he could cut through it when he published the Book of Mormon, which established a new biblical text over which he believed there would be and could be no dispute.
It's also during the April of that year, 1830, that using the book as the foundation, he established the Church of Jesus Christ. A year or so later, he added of Latter-day Saints. The Latter-day Saints is very important because it emphasizes the idea that Joseph Smith thought the end of time was very near at hand.
The Mormons believed it was possible to create the kingdom of heaven on earth, and it was in Nauvoo, Illinois, that they chose to build it. But when Joseph Smith introduced the practice of polygamy, there was trouble in paradise. Smith referred to the practice as the taking of spiritual wives and claimed that the doctrine had been revealed to him by God. Although Smith was considered a prophet, many in the Mormon Church initially resisted polygamy, including Smith's own wife, Emma.
Polygamy was never widespread. It was kept somewhat secret, and the polygamists tended to live in areas where they could support a large family on a farm and had an arrangement of that kind. Brigham Young himself said it was difficult to have so many wives because if he gave one a ribbon, he had to give all 27 a ribbon.
The adoption of polygamy made the movement grossly notorious. There were armed conflicts over polygamy. Smith was assassinated. The Mormons had to flee to Utah. And the Mormons became among the most hunted and reviled religious groups in the United States.
The Mormon exodus from Illinois began in 1846 under the leadership of Brigham Young. Over the next few years, some 12,000 Mormons would make the difficult trek to present-day Utah. There they built Salt Lake City, a feat of great industry and imagination.
The Mormon experiment shows us, along with the Shaker experiment and a number of the other experiments in the 19th century, that almost anything was possible in terms of social arrangement. They were willing to try very radical lifestyles to try to achieve this utopian dream, this dream of living in a world that was much better than the world they came from.